All right, let's go back to one of our top stories. That's an operation involving the police, the Hawks, and the Johannesburg Metro Police Department, as well as a private security company, believed to have successfully dismantled a suspected human trafficking ring in Sandringham, east of Johannesburg. Let's speak now to Calvin Rafadi, forensic and crime expert, as well as Tershia de Klerk, founder of the Joseph Movement and member of the National Freedom Network. Good evening to you both, and thank you so much for your time. I'm going to start with you, Tershia. What's your reaction to this discovery?
I must say that my reaction was a positive one, for the mere fact that we see that the private sector is also starting to play quite a big role when it comes to helping to rescue people who are victims of human trafficking. So that is one thing that really stood out to me in this regard. And we also need to always keep in mind that often a migration situation could be seen as a possible human trafficking situation or vice versa. And we need to be well equipped in order to identify the true nature of the case. In this case, we see that there's a lot of vulnerability, and that people in this case were specifically naked. So there was definitely exploitation that took place. So that also stood out with regards to this case.
All right. And that's where I'd like us to pick up, Calvin, because there's been a lot that's been said about the fact that they were naked. You know, some are saying that it was to humiliate them. Others are saying that it was to ensure that they do not escape. According to your understanding, watching some of what happens when it comes to human trafficking cases, why would that be?
Good evening. Yeah, indeed, I agree with Tershia. This is, you know, a success of the recovery of these particular human beings that were exploited for human trafficking. Indeed, that's one of the modus operandi, you know, keeping them naked so that they do not escape or even, you know, walk out of that particular property. And, you know, in most incidents, we see their passports will be taken, some of their bank cards and even cell phones, not to communicate with anybody. But we must emphasize that this is a serious problem, especially around, you know, towards the airport side. There hasn't been. Most of this human traffic take place in those big high walls suburbs. And there are people who are agent to a point that, you know, these people, they release them at a fee to go and work as cheap laborers in some of the wholesalers, some of the farms. But there is a fee that you can go and buy a particular person to come and labor, cheap labor at a particular outlet for yourselves.
Before I move back to Tershia, there's this 2024 trafficking in persons report by the U.S. State Department, and it looks at the fact that, you know, this issue of exploitation is quite big. But there's something else, Calvin, that I want you to talk to us about. They say that some of them are forced into begging. Are these similar to sometimes the people we might see at traffic lights?
Look, that's why I always get worried. And, you know, we call on the social development, the government, where you see every street robot in the suburbs, there's a lady with a small child there. And we do not know. Nobody has profiled those particular kids. So, indeed, we wouldn't like say it is, you know, it is not human trafficking. But some, they say, no, those kids are rented out. So even some elderlies who are disabled for that matter, some of them, they must go and work and then they come back and share the money amongst the particular syndicates. So I do fully agree that it does happen in some instances.
And Tershia, when you look at, you know, what is taking place, particularly when it comes to human trafficking and the different, you know, reasons that we may see persons being trafficked, one would then ask, are we failing to detect them en masse because of resources, or is there something else at play?
Yes, I'm so grateful that you asked that question. So the trouble with human trafficking is that it is a hidden crime. It is something that is often overshadowed by other crimes. For instance, we would look at drug trafficking that often overshadows human trafficking. We would look at cultural practices, for instance, and as you also mentioned, for instance, begging, which we see as something that's very normal in South Africa. However, it is a form of vulnerability, and it is indeed being exploited as well, especially in our country. And then there are other illegal activities, such as prostitution, for instance, where we see a sex trafficking that come into play. And then we also see forced illegal activity, for instance, online scamming. So forced illegal activity is something that is very, very rampant in South Africa. And therefore, it is so vital for us, not only as civilians, but also for the authorities, to know the red flags and be able to identify possible human trafficking situations and victims.
Calvin, why can't we clamp down on this? I mean, modern day slavery, like you say, there's a price that you pay for cheap labor. Certainly, there are failures here when it comes to the system and detecting what's going on.
Look, one of my panelists has said that she is right. There is a lot of crime that is hidden behind this particular crime. So, on the 17th of May, I think, 2024, there was a raid at one of the Desmond Tutu Center refugee camp, refugee center in Marabastad. Cell phones were taken from certain officials. Now, we're waiting for SIU. If they can give us a proper report of what they found on those cell phones, you'll be shocked that this thing even flows as far as, them buying asylums on behalf of those that they human traffic. For instance, the incident of yesterday, those who are arrested, if they've got cell phones, they need to check their communication. That's where you're going to get the big fishes. And there are some, some of the, internet cafe which operate, manufacturing this particular illegal asylums, especially around Kempton Park. They need to be constantly raided. Then that's when you can map the whole syndicate, including the big fish. So
it seems like from what you're saying that when you look at the line and the dots that are connecting, they may go to places we certainly aren't thinking that they can connect to.
Definitely they do. Definitely they do. Especially in the home affairs industry, in the, like we mentioned, the Desmond Tutu Center, refugee center, because before they release them at a fee, sometimes they fabricate certain identification so that even when they are found at a particular wholesaler, for instance, they've got some form of identity. Because once they are released, they don't come back to that property where they were first held. Now they will rent them out a room or sleep at a particular wholesaler or a warehouse where they will, conduct these cheap labor issues. But it flows as far as in the higher ranks. And the big fishes, they are also living a luxury life in the suburban areas. I mean, the nationality, the Somalians and Ethiopians, we've seen there's a particular, like a leaf that they chew. It's called mira. When they chew that thing, at night they don't sleep. They break big wholesalers, then they work for these big fishes. So that's why you'd see them driving big trucks and panel vans. So at night they chew that thing. They go out, they break, they bring the stock, they give it to the big fish. So it's a whole syndicate.
So wait, they chew it for what purpose?
That thing, once you chew it, this so-called mira, once they chew it, it makes them not to sleep. They can be very energetic for some time. So they chew that thing, they do not sleep. So it's part of the modus operandi of these nationalities. And then they break into big warehouses, especially around, Eden Vale, those big warehouses. They take the stock, and then they give it to the big fish. So not only do they take them to wholesalers to work as cheap laborers, but they also commit certain horrific crimes.
Tershia, as you've alluded to it, and Calvin here in studio, as you say, there are layers to, fighting human trafficking, and it can be hidden in different layers as well. What then becomes the approach that authorities now need to put in place in order to ensure that they actually crack through these very different layers and then deal with this once and for all?
It is exceptionally difficult to deal with it once and for all. We see that human trafficking is actually the fastest growing organized crime globally, and it's currently the second biggest organized crime globally following the drug trade. So it is very, very difficult. However, one of the ways in which we can reach victory is through preventative education. And that is very, very important to educate communities as to how one can help prevent human trafficking from happening, and also educate people as to victim identification. And then I just want to take this opportunity. We see in South Africa that one of the top ways in which traffickers lure their victims is through fake job offers. Now, this could well have been the case with these Ethiopian people. And we have to be exceptionally careful as South Africans as well. So, having said that, I want to mention that we have to remember that South Africa has a national human trafficking hotline as well, and they also do job vetting. So also for our South Africans, if they ever find themselves in a situation where they are offered a job and they're unsure, or there's maybe something that seems, fishy, then they can phone the hotline, and they can either report a possible human trafficking situation, or they can ask them to vet a job offer for them.
Yeah.
And then with your permission, if we can mention that number, it is 0800 222 777, and they work very closely with SAPs and with the Hawks, and also with private individuals.
Calvin, I'm going to give you the final bite here. How do you spot a fake job advert? When do alarm bells need to go off? Because in a country like ours, a lot of people are unemployed. When they see that there's a job ad, they literally want to apply.
Well, it's difficult to know, especially if you are called for an interview. There was one incident quickly that I worked on of a very close friend of mine, but the daughter. She got a job opportunity as a modeling agent in Cape Town. Upon arrival there, then she was promised, okay, there's a job, but you need to serve as a bar and serve some drinks. But then it turned out she was then transferred to a brothel. Now, then she was drugged. Then eventually, when we went there to look for the girl, we were told that no, the guys, they've already invested money on that girl, 250K. So that's what they asked us to pay before we can get the girl. So, but from the onset, it becomes difficult to spot those type of ads and those type of adverts. But at the same time, we need to caution our daughters and young kids that, share the information. If you go for a job interview, go with someone, let someone be outside, let your parents know. Do not, play the cards close to your chest. Because if you inform as many people, they know where you went and what could be, in that building or wherever the interview that you will be attending.
And that's the best advice. Certainly don't, keep the information. And remember that number that Tershia gave us, if you're not sure and you want to then make sure that you check if this particular job offer makes sense or it doesn't, it's 0800 222 777. 0800 222 777. Just double check, make sure that everything is above board. But let me thank you both for your time. Appreciate it. That's Calvin Rafadi here in studio with us, forensic and crime expert, as well as online Tershia de Klerk, founder of the Joseph Movement and member of the National Freedom Network.